All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, formal welcome to Daily Power Parsha. Today is January 22nd, 2021, and we are finishing up the Torah portion of Bo, reading about the Exodus and all that entails. All right, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to jump right in. This is Exodus chapter 10, verse number, not chapter 10 at all. That's the beginning of the portion. This is 6th reading, which is going to be Exodus chapter 12, verse 29. Here it is. I mean, we've talked about the warnings. We talked about the Paschal Lamb. We talked about all the other stuff that needs to be done. Now it's going down. Came to pass at midnight, as promised, by the way. God said it's going to happen at midnight, and it happened at midnight. Bachatzi halayla. In the Hebrew, it says at the midpoint of night. Chatzi halayla means midnight. That the Lord smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, his own kid, who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who is in the dungeon, and every firstborn animal. Now, this verse might sound familiar because I think it was yesterday that we had the promise that this was going to happen, that God was going to smite the firstborn of Pharaoh, the firstborn of the maidservant, whatever. But here, this is telling us how it went down. So before was the warning, and now the live action, right? This is active. This is active 10th plague going on right now in the narrative. Verse 30. And Pharaoh rose at night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great outcry in Egypt. This is a very powerful line. For there was no house in which no one was dead. I mean, look at that line. There was no house in which no one was dead. It means the plague hit every household. Every household. Let's see if there's a Rashi on this. Look at this, look at this, look at this. If there was a firstborn, he was dead. If there was no firstborn, the oldest household member was called the firstborn. As it is said, I too shall make him a firstborn. Another explanation, some Egyptian women were unfaithful to their husbands and bore children from bachelors, or I guess from others. Thus, they would have many firstborns. Sometimes one woman would have 5, each one firstborn of his father. Anyway, interesting. So bottom line is, there was no household that didn't have, hey, Krista, good to see you, that didn't have a death. Terrible, terrible plague. By the way, as you know, but I'm going to mention this anyway, we don't celebrate the plagues. When we mention the plagues on Passover, we pour out some of the wine. We spill out some of the wine because it hurts us also, right? I mean, we don't rejoice in suffering, even if it's the ones that were oppressing us. Now, it doesn't mean that we'd rather still be slaves. No, but it's hard to read about. I mean, even though it was a great benefit, it ended up, this was the only way essentially that the Exodus could happen. It doesn't make it fun. It doesn't make it, we take it lightly or we take it frivolously. It's a somber moment. All right. So Pharaoh called for so Pharaoh gets up. So he called for Moses and Aaron at night, and according to our commentaries, according to the sages, he actually got up out of the palace and started looking around the Jewish neighborhood and asking, where's Moses? Where's Aaron? I got to speak to them. And he said, this is what Pharaoh says, finally, get up and get out from among my people, both you as well as the children of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have spoken. That's it. This one line, and you know what the frustrating thing is? He could have said it 10 plagues ago. He could have said it 10 plagues ago. How hard was that to say? Apparently very hard for him to say. Next verse, verse 32, take also your flocks and also your cattle as you have spoken and go. But, always a catch, you shall also bless me. Why? Because Pharaoh was also a firstborn. And so he wanted an assurance from Moses that if he lets them go, that Moses will kind of give him some protection for himself. His own son died, but he wanted his own personal protection. He did get that, which is why he was able to chase the Jewish people 7 days later into the sea. But that's for next week. All right, that's literally next week's Torah portion. So the Egyptians took hold of the people to hasten to send them out of the land. In other words, the Egyptians were saying, let's go, get out. We don't want you here anymore. This is, it's enough. For they said, we are all dead. In other words, if nothing changes, we're all goners. The people, listen to this, look at this. The people, the Jewish people, picked up their dough. They picked up their dough when it was not yet leavened. Their leftovers bound in their garments on their shoulders. So that line, the people picked up their dough when it was not yet leavened. You know what it makes it sound like? It makes it sound like the night of the Exodus. They were midnight, they were baking bread. It was in the bread machine. And the Exodus was going on. And the Egyptians said, get out. And so they took whatever, it was the middle of cooking, middle of baking, whatever. They had to get out. They picked up their dough, or maybe just the dough before. It hadn't yet risen. They quickly took it out. Here's the truth. Truth is they were already, and we read this a few days ago. The Jewish people were told that on that night, they should eat their Paschal lamb with matzah and maror. They were already told to bake it unleavened, right? Here it sounds like it's almost by accident. They were caught, in middle of baking process and quickly get out. And it didn't have a chance to rise and they were kicked out. You should know that both are true. They were told to make matzah and it also came in a way of haste. How do you reconcile it? There's a lot of Kabbalah on this and Hasidic philosophy on this. Maybe we'll get a chance to share some ideas today. Maybe not. Either way, I just want to I want to alert you to this idea that, again, from verse 34, it seems like the matzah was an accident, was a happy accident. In truth, the matzah was intentional. It was by divine command. God had told Moses to tell the people to bake matzah and have maror when you eat your Paschal lamb. Let's continue. And the children of Israel did according to Moses' order. And they borrowed from the Egyptians. Borrowed, I'm going to put in air quotes, borrowed, never to return. From the Egyptians, silver objects, golden objects, and garments. At that point, the Egyptian neighbors were like, take whatever you want, please leave. Get out of here, we're all dying. You got to go. The Lord, verse 36, the Lord gave the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they lent them, and they emptied out Egypt. They emptied out Egypt. I want to share with you, I think Rashi should say this. Let's see. Nope. Okay. The Talmud says, I thought Rashi might quote the Talmud. The Talmud says, they emptied out Egypt like a net that has no fish and like a granary that has no grain. They emptied it out like there was nothing left. They emptied out the wealth of Egypt. Verse 37. This is when the Exodus happens, right here. This is, if you're waiting for the Exodus, verse 37. The children of Israel, and it's like, after all this buildup, it's like such a, there's no like fireworks. Where are the fireworks? I don't know. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramses in Egypt to Sukkot, outside of Egypt. That was it. That was it, right here. The journey from Ramses to Sukkot. That was it. They're out of Egypt. About 600,000 on foot, the men besides the young children and, of course, the women. So there was about a few million people that journeyed out. And also, look at verse 38. And also, and this is going to cause some consternation later, a great mixed multitude went up with them. What is the great mixed multitude? That means Egyptians that wanted to join the people, which ultimately was a bit of a mixed blessing, because some of these Egyptians ultimately turned against the Jewish people, but nonetheless, there were others that joined the procession out of Egypt. And also flocks and cattle, very much livestock they took with them. Verse 39, back to the food. Jews and food. We're not going to get too far away from the menu. They baked the dough that they had taken out of Egypt as unleavened cakes. Remember that dough that didn't have a chance to rise, and before the Egyptians kicked them out at midnight? Okay. Or after midnight? Yeah. So they baked that dough as unleavened cakes. For it had not leavened, it didn't rise, for they were driven out of Egypt, and they could not tarry. And also they had not made provisions for themselves. They didn't pack a to go. So they quickly baked whatever they had, even though it hadn't risen yet. They baked it as matzah, and they left. They bounced out of Egypt. Again, there's two matzah. There's two matzot. There's the matzah that they were commanded to make, and the matzah that they were forced into baking because they had to leave. Even though you and I know that we read yesterday that the holiday of Passover, you're supposed to eat matzah for all 7 days. Again, there's an interesting thing over here. I'll just tell you what it says in Kabbalah. It says in Kabbalah that there's the matzah that you make, and there's the matzah that's made for you, right? There's, let's say, the matzah represents humility because it's flat, as opposed to bread, which is puffed up with hot air pockets inside. Matzah is flat, and it represents being humble, surrender. Represents surrender. There's the surrender that you can get yourself into that space of. Like, you tell yourself, I'm going to surrender to something greater than myself. There's self-induced surrender, and then there's the surrender that happens when something awe-inspiring happens to you. And that's a greater form of surrender. Because as much as you're going to surrender, it's still your ego telling you to surrender almost. You with me? It's like, I'm telling myself to suspend self, to surrender. But it's still me. There's still a trace of me that's driving it. But when the surrender comes from outside, in a moment that just takes the breath away and just overwhelms, there's no ego there at all. That removes all traces. That's the ultimate matzah, so to speak. So there's the matzah that we were told to bake, get as far as you can in that humility and surrender. And then there's the matzah that happens to us. Then there's the matzah that happens to us. That's the second form of matzah. Does that make sense? I know I said it kind of short. These are long ideas and we could elaborate, but that's the bottom line. Two forms of matzah. Oh, and in Kabbalah, it's called matzah before midnight, that you were supposed to eat with the meal, and then matzah after midnight, the surprise matzah. A person could work on themselves for years to be humble and surrender and be open to God. And they could climb that mountain, or get further in that space. But then something happens that completely, whether good or the opposite, God forbid, that completely, overwhelms or takes one's breath away or whatever, and that does a completely different number on the person, right? So as much as we can get there on our own, there's much more than that happens when it happens to us. But you need one before the other, right? You need to work on it, and then you're a vessel for the experience. Please God, it should only be good experiences. All right, let's continue verse 40. And the habitation of the children of Israel that they dwelled in Egypt was 430 years. By the way, that wasn't exactly the case. It wasn't 430 years, a little bit less, about 210 years, about half. But it's counting from the time that God told Abraham about this, about what would happen to his descendants. It came to pass at the end of 430 years, and it came to pass in that very day that all the legions of the Lord went out of the land of Egypt. Oh, so I guess you have this verse. This verse kind of like Ta-da! The Exodus. They left. It is a night. Look at this, verse 42. It is a night of anticipation for the Lord to take them out of the land of Egypt. This night is the Lord's guarding all the children of Israel throughout their generations. That's why there's a custom. You know, in the Seder, we open the door for Elijah. The custom that many have is that although we close the door eventually, that some don't lock their doors that night. Why? I'm not, you do you. I'm not, don't blame me for anything. I'm just saying that the source of that is, it's called Leil Shimurim. It's a night of God watching. So God watches us, not only them, but throughout their generations. So it's an evening of special divine protection. So that's a special blessing for the night of Passover every year. Okay, let's continue. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, more mitzvot. Remember I told you we have now from a few days ago, we have a new kind of energy in Torah. It's not only story, but it's also mitzvah. It's also, we have now commandments. So here we go. This is the God says to Moses and Aaron, this is the statute of the Passover sacrifice. No estranged one may partake of it, and every man's slave purchased for his money, you shall circumcise him, then he'll be permitted to partake of it. Of course, slave here, it would be ironic if the Torah was sanctioning slavery in the form of that the Jewish people just got out of, right? That would be highly problematic. Of course, what we're talking about here is the Jewish version of it, or the Torah version of it, which is not at all like what the Egyptians did to the Jewish people. This is basically somebody who works in someone else's house. But in halakha and Jewish law, you have to take care of the person like you take care of yourself. You have to give them the food that you eat. And if you have only one pillow, you have to give it to them and not to you, etc. So the point is that they become a member of the household, right? So as a member of the household, they should have a bris, a circumcision like you, and they can partake in your Seder. A sojourner or a hired hand may not partake of it. In other words, the mitzvah of the Karban Pesach is not meant for the stranger, so to speak. That sacrificial, the sacrificial part of it is not meant for the outsider, but someone who's part of the family, part of the household, could partake of it. It must be eaten. Again, we're just reiterating laws of the Paschal Lamb for all generations. It must be eaten in one house, like we mentioned a few days ago. You shall not take any of the meat of the house to the outside. Neither shall you break any of its bones. That's a very powerful idea. Don't break any bones of the lamb that you're eating, the Paschal Lamb. Why not? So I want to share with you an insight. An insight. Why would you break the bones of the meat? You would break it. So typically it was done by those that were more impoverished. They would break the bone, and then I guess the marrow or whatever it is, like to get every ounce of whatever from the food. But that you do when you don't have, when you're in a place of poverty. And so what the mitzvah is that on the night of Passover, you should act like royalty. You know, like we lean when we eat as a sign of royalty and freedom. So we're meant to eat also in a way of freedom and royalty. Don't go breaking the bones and sucking out the marrow. Eat like a king. Have plenty of food when you eat the Paschal Lamb. Make sure you eat well. Don't eat in an impoverished way. Eat in an opulent way. Eat in a majestic way. Be a king or a queen on the night of Passover when you're eating the Seder. And by the way, this is also, I think, a powerful psychological insight. It's when you can almost, because you could ask the question, how could the Jewish people feel free after so many years of servitude? And so here the Torah is telling us how. Sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. Act like you're free. Do the things that free people do, and you'll start feeling into that space. Because otherwise, I still feel enslaved. I still feel subjugated. I still don't feel free. Okay, you can't change how you feel, but don't break a bone when you eat. That you can do, right? You can stop yourself from breaking a bone. Yeah, good. Just do that. And you can lean, you can relax while you're eating. You can relax, maybe is the emotion, but you can lean Yeah, just do that. Just do that. And you'll start feeling you'll start feeling a little bit freer. This is the truth in life. We act our way into our feelings. If you're feeling a little sad, turn on some music and start dancing. Even if you don't feel it, just start moving. And that movement itself will change the mood. That's what it says. They've done studies. I wish I had a pencil near me. Look, I do. They've done studies that have said that if you, they took people, this is what it was. They took people and they had them put like a pencil in their mouth like this and hold it there for a certain amount of time. And then they asked them questions afterwards and they measured their happiness quotient. And then they had people hold a pencil like this, like in their teeth like this, kind of forcing them into a smile, forcing the muscles. And they asked the same questions. They did however they do studies. And the happiness quotient was that much higher for the second batch of people. So if you hold a pencil like this, you have to kind of like frown to hold it in a little bit. Like your lip muscles have to go this way to hold it. So then you respond, it actually induces a more depressed mood. If you have to go if you have to force a smile, it actually lightens the mood. There's something about the physical that can change how we feel. It's a powerful, powerful thing. We might call it, the kids might call it a life hack. Call it whatever you want. Call it a life hack. It sounds cooler that way. The Torah is giving us a life hack. You want to feel free? Don't break the bones. Don't suck the marrow. I like the marrow. Stop. Don't suck the marrow. Get a double portion. Don't go for the marrow, right? Okay, if you like the marrow, go for the marrow. I'm just saying that act your way into a feeling. All right, verse 47. I love that line. So much insight into Torah, right? One half of one verse, not to break a bone, that seems like off the wall. Like, who cares? God really cares if we, break the bone. There's a lesson here. And everything I'm telling you is obviously, is sourced in the commentaries and Kabbalah, etc. All right, verse 47. The entire community of Israel shall make it, right? Every Jew. And should a proselyte reside with you, he shall make a Passover sacrifice to the Lord. All his males shall be circumcised, and then he may approach to make it. We see this connection between bris, the circumcision, and the Paschal lamb, and he will be like the native of the land, but no uncircumcised male may partake of it. So you have to have that bris before it. There shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who resides in your midst. In other words, the way I understand it is, what does it mean that there's one law? Just like you are circumcised, so too they should be circumcised if they want to partake in it, etc. Let's continue. All the children of Israel did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. In other words, they did this Paschal lamb, the details like it was commanded. Once again, here's, in case we missed it, it came to pass on that very day that the Lord took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt with their legions. Yeah, the Exodus happened that day. That's reading 6. We have one more reading to go. But I want to circle back to what I told you before, that the actual journey out of Egypt happened so subtly. They journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. Sometimes it's little steps that we take in life that create a big difference. It's kind of like what I told you about the bones and not breaking the bones, but that was more about how to, life hack. But this is about taking steps, and it might seem like a small step. It might seem like a very small step, but we don't know. That one step might be the difference between Egypt and Exodus, right? So never shortchange within yourself that one step. Like an example that I always go back to, right? Let's talk about kosher. Say somebody, is still on the journey of kosher and not 100% kosher all the time, and may wonder, is there any significance in the next meal making sure that it's kosher food? Yes. Yes, that's a step. First of all, even if it doesn't lead to anything else, you had a kosher meal. That's fantastic. But also, who knows? We should never discount the power of one step, whatever that means, right? Or one mitzvah, right? Let's talk about Shabbos candles, like lighting Shabbat candles. So somebody who lights once in a while might question themselves, what's the point? If I don't do it every week, so then what's the point? Every single mitzvah is infinitely valuable, and every mitzvah constitutes a step on the journey. And we can never know the impact of one mitzvah. All right, let's continue. You should know this was a big philosophy of the Rebbe. And we're approaching now Shabbos, Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, the anniversary of the day that the Rebbe assumed the leadership of the Chabad movement in 1951. One of the Rebbe's big, ideas was about the power of one mitzvah. Sandrine, I think you sent me pictures of mitzvah tanks. Did you send me a picture of a mitzvah tank that you saw? Yes? Is that correct? Am I misremembering?
Yes.
Okay.
New York.
In New York, yeah. So if you've been to New York, you may have seen a mitzvah tank. Don, have you seen a mitzvah tank? I see you shake. Yeah. And that was called mitzvah tank because the Rebbe said, why should the Rebbe used terminology about fighting against the darkness of the world and bringing light using military, kind of like trying to transform the energy of a tank from destruction to positivity, right? The Rebbe was always about language and transformation. So the Rebbe was used the language. It was an RV, right? It's like an R, whatever. It's like a large van or whatever it is, that you can go and do a mitzvah in. But the Rebbe called it a tank. The Rebbe wanted to mobilize and let's bring light into the world. Why should the dark side have all the ammunition? Let's bring it to positivity. And the Rebbe advocated that yeshiva students and everyone should go out on Friday afternoons and ask people, are you Jewish? Would you like to wrap tefillin for men? Are you Jewish? Would you like a kit, a Shabbat candle lighting kit for women? And if the person's not Jewish, then give them a message about the 7 Noahide laws and about bring light into the world in whatever way one can. So the Rebbe was always encouraging about one more mitzvah, and there was so much criticism from other rabbinic leaders. What, you're taking someone off the street and wrapping tefillin with them, giving them Shabbat candles? What's the point? They'll do it once and then what? And the Rebbe said, what? Don't tell someone, who are you to tell? First of all, every mitzvah is infinitely valuable. So even if it never goes any further, it's infinitely valuable. But aside from that, one step could be transformative. Again, it doesn't have to be, but it could be transformative. We don't know what that next step means for us, what that one step could mean for us. It might be the step from Ramses to Sukkot, the step outside of whatever that Egypt is for us.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
It's also comforting, just to hear the music and stuff and to have it to go by, even if you weren't really involved with them at that particular time. It's comforting to know, the Jews are out there, for us.
Yeah. It's a beautiful source of pride. I will tell you that some people get annoyed. It's like, what are you doing? But most times people appreciate it. And you and I have talked personally many times about expressions of Jewish pride and symbols, and it's by and large, it's appreciated as a beautiful symbol of Jewish pride and community and that sort of thing. There's actually, I want to share with you a story that the Rebbe said at a Fabrengen once. This was kind of like, and now remember Paul Harvey, now the rest of the story? This was kind of like the rest of the story. So, I mean, you never met an activist like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe was such an activist about positivity and Yiddishkeit and just never resting in activism. Always like another campaign, another mitzvah. Let's push Jewish books. Every home should have a Jewish book. Let's push mezuzah. Make sure every house is a mezuzah, kosher mezuzah. Let's push education. Constantly rolling out new campaigns, mitzvah campaigns. It's an unbelievable legacy that the Rebbe left, and really is still ongoing. But one thing the Rebbe did, and he modeled it oftentimes after trends in the world. So he talked about JFK. I'm pretty sure he talked about JFK creating the Peace Corps. Is this correct that JFK created the Peace Corps? Yeah. So the Rebbe talked about this. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all of you a little bit closer. So the Rebbe said that it's such a great idea that we're going to create a mitzvah corps, like a Jewish Peace Corps. And so he sent out, and I don't know what the Peace Corps does in the US or if it still exists, I'm not sure. But the Rebbe created one that's called Merka Shlichus, which is basically yeshiva students. It was easiest campaigners or whatever was yeshiva students who, could go out there because, you have a family, you have a job. It's a little bit harder, although the Rebbe wanted everyone to be involved in whatever way they could. But yeshiva students in the summer, you got 2 months off of yeshiva, so take a few weeks. And Merka Shlichus was set up. It's called Merka Shlichus. Yeshiva students would go in pairs. It's still to today, by the way, still to this very day. Yeshiva students go out in pairs, and they go out to communities that don't have established Jewish community, that don't have an infrastructure established. So a lot of the Chabad houses in the United States and beyond were created by this process of two guys going out, literally knocking on doors. Maybe there was a point of contact that headquarters had somehow. Somebody reached out or they knew of somebody, but otherwise you just knock on a door. Any Jews here? Yeah, and you just find out who's Jewish, and then you go knock on their door and say, is there anything that you need? You would come with Jewish books and tefillin and mezuzahs, stocked with Jewish stuff. Whatever you need, we're here to help and provide and to share a good word. And anybody else? And that's it. Just go from door to door and just bring positivity and mitzvahs to people. Like no agenda other than here's an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and you're not forgotten about. The stories that came from that are I can't even tell you. Aside from the fact that literal communities and shuls and synagogues and schools are built today because of that. But aside from that, just the crazy stories of people that were ready to convert out of Judaism. There was a woman, and she said, but she didn't because of she felt alone. No one else. She just wanted to give up on her Judaism, but she felt guilty for her mother, so she prayed to her mother or her grandmother. She prayed, give me a sign, tomorrow. If not, that's it. And the next day she gets a knock on the door. And that's one drop in the bucket of stories. The Rebbe said at Fabrengen that there were two guys that went out to a community and they met for a week and they met no one. They met no Jews. They knocked on doors, nothing, zero. And they came back, to New York or whatever it is, and they felt like, I don't know if they wasted their time, but they felt like disappointed that they didn't accomplish anything. The Rebbe says, here's the rest of the story. I got a letter or a phone call, I forget what it was, from a woman who was sitting in her homebound woman, looking out her window, and she sees two yeshiva students with a garb, a hat and a jacket with the tzitzis flying. And she said, I was overwhelmed with emotions. I hadn't seen signs of Jewish life in the city ever, and I hadn't seen that since the old country or whatever it was. She said, I was so inspired and so affected, and so that I committed to, once again, starting again to light Shabbos candles or whatever it was. And somehow she knew, she sensed that it was, Lubavitch or Chabad. And so that's why she reached out to the Rebbe to thank him for sending these guys. And the Rebbe said, sometimes you can have an influence, an impact on someone and not even be aware of it. You think that nothing happened, right? That no impact was made, that no one was affected, that nothing came of it. Little do you know the impact and what could the ripple effect of that impact. So I mentioned this in the sense of the power of one mitzvah, but even the power of no mitzvah, but the visual, because Donna mentioned about the visual, the power of the visual to be transformed. All right. It's a story that's very touching for me, and I hope that it's significant, that's meaningful to you as well. All right, let me share the seventh reading. All right, this is it. This is the culmination of Bo. Exodus chapter 13, verse number 1. This is the topic that we focused on Wednesday night at the Torah studies class. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Sanctify to me every firstborn." Remember the death of the firstborn? I spared the Jewish firstborn. All right, they owe me big time. "Sanctify to me every firstborn, every one that opens the womb among the children of Israel, among man and among animals, it is mine," or the firstborn is mine. Moses said to the people, "Remember this day," right? This is the selfie, right? Don't just experience it, but snapshot it. Got to remember this for all time. Remember this day when you went out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for with a mighty hand the Lord took you out of here, and therefore no leaven shall be eaten, no chametz on Passover. Today you are going out in the month of spring. Passover is always in the spring. And it will come to pass that the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Lord of Israel, which he swore to your forefathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, and you shall perform this service, that means the Paschal lamb, in this month, in the springtime. For 7 days, this is referring to the holiday of Passover to be commemorated for all time. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened cakes, and on the seventh day there is a festival for the Lord. Unleavened cakes, you're probably wondering why it repeats it so many times. Well, the Talmud explains that each time there's another layer of law that's derived from it, and that's what the Talmud does. It literally derives, with the perspective that there's no extra word in Torah, it derives laws from each instance of this. Unleavened cake shall be eaten during 7 days, and no leaven shall be seen in your possession, and no leavening shall be seen in yours throughout all of your borders. And you shall tell your son on that day, on that future day, right? And this is the source of the son who doesn't know to ask. You see, we yesterday or 2 days ago, we talked about the son who asks what's going on. So that's one answer. But there's also the child that doesn't even know to ask. So this is the answer to that child. You shall in other words, education should not only be when you get asked, proactive education. Even if your child doesn't ask, you should educate. And you should say, because of this, the Lord did this for me when I went out of Egypt. In other words, this is why we're doing this, because God took us out of Egypt, and because of this, that's why God did this. And it shall be to you as a sign upon your hand and as a remembrance between your eyes. This refers to the mitzvah of tefillin. We just spoke about tefillin. Should be a sign on your hand, that's the arm tefillin, and a remembrance between your eyes, that's the head tefillin. When you put on tefillin, it's also a commemoration of the Exodus. In order that the law of the Lord shall be in your mouth, for with a mighty hand the Lord took you out of Egypt. And you shall keep the statute at its appointed time. In other words, all of the commandments regarding Passover, the lamb, the matzah, no chametz, etc. Keep it at the right time from year to year as an annual celebration. And it will come to pass when the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your forefathers that he's given to you, that you shall give over to the Lord whatever opens the womb. And every miscarriage that opens the womb of an animal which will be yours, the males belong to the Lord. And every firstborn donkey, so the firstborn kosher animals, you bring as a sacrifice, you give to the Kohen as an offering. What about the firstborn donkey, which is not kosher? Every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. Switch it out for a kosher animal. And if you do not redeem it, you shall decapitate it, because if you didn't redeem it, then it can't be for mundane use. Don't decapitate it, redeem it. But if you don't, it can't return to mundane use. It's holy. And every firstborn of man amongst your sons you shall redeem with cash, right? You don't redeem it for another person. You just that's a financial redemption. And it will come to pass, another preemptive educational question. If your son asks you in the future, saying, "What is this? Like, what's going on? What's Passover about?" You shall say to him, "With a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." And it came to pass when Pharaoh was too stubborn to let us out, the Lord slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I slaughter for a sacrifice all the male, that's the animals, right? Obviously, all male animals that open the womb, and every firstborn of my sons, of the humans, are redeemed. I will redeem. And it shall be a sign upon your hand, and for ornaments between your eyes. Again, tefillin, for with the mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt. And that concludes the Torah portion of Bo. There's no way to do justice to all that we could talk about on any given Torah portion, let alone these last two readings that we covered today. But I hope that I shared enough to keep you, to keep you dangerous with the insight. Ray, go ahead. Yeah. Don't forget to unmute.
Okay, so I wanted to mention that my middle grandson, I don't know if when he was at TABC or Yeshiva University, went out with a group of guys to communities that had nothing religious there to impart religion to them. And he did that
Amazing.
For a few years. Yes.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Right. So I think it made an impact on the guys as well as on the people they were going to.
Yeah. And the Rebbe knew that also, that it's not only going to be transformative to the communities and the people in the communities, but also the guys that are going out. You could do anything over the summer. You can, get a job and, whatever, go to a camp. And you could also do that. It was only for like a week or two, but to go out and make and bring light into someone's life, there's nothing better that you could do in life than lift someone's spirits. I mean, what's better than that? I mean, literally, what's better than that? So you're right, and thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful thing. It's a gift not only to those that they met, but as a gift to them as well. All right, so that's it for today. I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos, and may this Shabbos be truly liberating, and may it be an experience for all of us that is touching and spiritual and uplifting and freeing. We take the energy of this Shabbos, of the Exodus, as well as the energy of Yud Shvat, and make good commitments to not only take the next step for ourselves, whatever that is, or take another step, but also to share that with others. Like I mentioned Wednesday night, to always share the light and pass it forward. That's what we're meant to do. All right. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good Shabbos.
See you hopefully Sunday morning, please God.
Good, how do you say? Good 10 Shabbat.
Yeah.
Chag or?
Thank you. See you. Take care, everybody.